Hey guys, we're up here. This is Milk the Funk Live, north of the border. We're up here in Burlington, Ontario, at Nickel Brook Brewing, the Funk Lab.
Yes, sir.
Richard Priest invited us up here from Escarpment Labs. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We're going to talk beer. You guys ask questions on the Facebook page. I'll relay the questions. We do have a few questions to answer, but we're going to get started. I'll let Richard start off right here.
Sure. I'm Richard. I'm one of the co-founders of Escarpment Labs. We are a yeast supplier north of the border in Canada predominantly. Currently, we supply yeast to breweries across the whole country. We have sort of in the past specialized in Brett and bacteria, and we still do a lot of that. We have a lot of unique Brett and bacteria cultures and sour blends, and we're still constantly doing research, constantly doing R&D to develop more strains so that Canada has unique sour beer products. And I think that this is a really cool thing we can do, and then we end up with really tasty beer at the end of the day. We also have cider makers as well, like Tarek here, and he's also we're all members of Milk the Funk actually. So
yeah, so maybe I'll go from there. I'm Tarek from Rebel Cider. I'm just making ciders in Ontario right now. I'm working on distribution for some fun stuff to LA pretty soon, but that'll be a few months from now. Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm doing a lot of ciders with pretend YCs. Just experimented with some lactobacillus for the last couple of years, and as soon as I can get my hands on some PDO, that'll be next. That's just a dig at Richard because he hasn't got me. But yeah, so soon enough that'll be something I'm doing too. My thing is kind of recreating sour beer styles in the cider world. But yeah.
Sweet. My name's Matt. I work for Nickel Brook, where we're at, and this is our Funk Lab, as you mentioned. So we now have two breweries, one here and one in Hamilton, Ontario. And so Hamilton's where we do all of our clean brewing. And so we were able to convert this facility in our 15-hectare brew house here into a all sour and funk dedicated brew house. So we're doing things, we're doing kettle sours, we're doing tank sours and funks, and we're doing a lot of barrel aging as well. We have about 450 barrels in our program, bourbon barrels mostly, as well as Pinot Noir, some white wine barrels, mostly Ontario wine, which is really cool. We like to support local and use local. We do a lot of sours, and we do a lot of fruited sours now. So our Raspberry Berliner Weiss, Raspberry Uber was a really popular beer last year, which we're bringing out again this year. We've got a cucumber lime goza, and then we're doing a lot of other stuff. So playing in that Brett, PDO, lacto world, and doing it without having to worry about cross-contaminating with our IPAs and pale ales, which is really fun. I'm not a brewer, so I don't know the technical side, but I know a lot about the drinking side, and so I hope I can answer some questions on that. And we'll go to Mark.
My name's Mark. I'm from Bench Brewing. We're building a spontaneous and wild ferment brewery down in Beamsville, Ontario, kind of the wine region. But in the meantime, we have had some friends give us some tenant brewing space to do a few kind of funky experiments to go into the LCBO. But yeah, we're one of the first cool ships in Ontario. I think Bellwood's just beat us to the punch by
like a day.
By a little bit, yeah. So, but I'm not angry at those guys. They're great brewers, good friends. So
They got the triple decker.
They do the triple decker, but we got the 50 hacker. So
put that on a T-shirt.
Michael's bigger than
They got the triple decker, we got the 50 hacker. Fuck you.
So yeah, it's going to be a good time for Ontario funk sours coming up. I think just catching on here. That's why we're all sitting on this table here. So exciting time for beer drinkers here. Yeah.
I'll let you start with the company, and I'll start with the beer.
I'm Graham. I'm one of the founders of Block 3 Brewing up in St. Jacobs. I'll go for Kevin.
My name's Kevin Freer. I'm the head brewer at Block 3 Brewing. They brought me on about a year ago, just over a year ago, to kind of guide the creative direction of the company. And since then, we've increased our wood capacity quite a bit. We've got foeder, we've got puncheons. I know, right? Come on. Put that on a T-shirt. We kind of changed everything over to mixed ferment. We still do like the IPAs and the pale ales and stuff, but the bulk of what we spend our creative time and projects on is mixed fermentation, funky stuff, sour stuff, all that goodness.
Can I just ask a question? What are we drinking here? Can you explain what that was? Because
Okay,
that is
yeah.
really freaking good.
Is it good? Okay.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I do part-time brewing at a place called Von Site's Theoretical, Tennessee. It's a 2-barrel brewery, and
Is there some of that?
we did need some water? And we did a beer in an old ale that we use a combination of yeast from Southeast Labs, and that Brandon Jones from Embrace the Funk, Yazoo Brewing Company, told me to make sure I use bread ale from Y yeast, not from White Labs, because the Y yeast version will cherry pie it if you use dark malts. And literally after about 3 months, you get a big time cherry pie. And this particular beer, we brewed did a 59-gallon barrel, and we had about 4 gallons excess of beer. So we just put it in a carboy, and then we ran burnt the tube off the barrel into the carboy. Didn't know what was going to happen. So we had a beer festival we were at this weekend, and about a week ago we decided, let's taste this beer. It's 4 gallons, not enough to bottle, not enough to keg, and it was delicious. And so we were thinking, well, we got to name this thing. And you know, I was just happened to watch a movie, and at the end of the movie said no animals were harmed during the film of this movie. And I said, you know, there's a huge cherry pie fruit presence. I get a big fruit presence and also a red wine presence. So I named the beer No Fruit Were Harmed during the making of this beer. And so all the fruit flavors derived from the yeast combination, the HS2 yeast that comes from a farm in East Tennessee, and then mixed with the Brett L, and then with the dark grains. So all the fruit flavor is derived from that. I'm excited to taste the beer in the barrel that's actually in a red wine barrel. But it's an old ale, tart old ale, not sour, it's tart. But I was pretty pleased with the beer. We had a good reception of this beer at this weekend, so
Yeah.
I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
Quite
cool beer.
Yeah. All right, thanks, guys.
And no one will ever get to try it. So
Yeah.
sorry guys.
Hopefully we can recreate it.
Yeah. It's always
Yeah,
a
the
challenge.
20 liters is not going to go very far.
Yeah. And it was never heard from again.
Yeah.
That made it here.
Okay, got a first question here.
Sweet.
The first, and
Just yell
I'll
it.
read the question and you guys reread it.
Okay.
Guy named J.M. Hammond. Does anyone up north doing aged sours in stainless or all in wood barrels? Puncheons or fooders?
Aged
So-
sours and stainless.
Yeah, that's-
Mark's your guy.
Yeah. So we're doing a few funk and not sour but tart beers in stainless. Usually, you know, looking at a 21-day turnaround to get either one of those two. There's a few techniques you can use to speed it up without making any deleterious contributions to the beer. We don't do kettle sours. I want to have live lactobacillus in my beer. I think it definitely affects how it ages, and also how it drinks as well. So what we do is for our sour beers, we'll do a first portion that's a mixed ferment with lactobacillus at a high temperature to get some acidity, and then we'll knock in a second at 0 IBUs, and then we'll knock in a second batch that's 30 IBUs to give overall 15 IBUs, and we'll pitch our Brettanomyces and Saccharomyces with it, so the IBUs kinds of locks in the acidity there, but over time the lactobacillus is going to keep developing and eventually probably become hop tolerant. So in the bottle, I'm assuming after a few years it'll be a funky, slightly more tart kind of beer. But yeah, I mean, fresh, it's a lot of citra hops. Because I like the way acidity and hops kind of come together. I think it gives a different aspect to it. You get that fruitiness. Once you get acidity, now you're a tropical fruit. Now you're more of a real passion fruit or a mango, or less in that kind of citrusy world, more in that tropical world. That's kind of cool.
So I don't brew, so this is maybe outside of my wheelhouse, but our Brett Pale Ale, our uncommon element, I'm assuming is because it's 100% Brett, it has to be also fermented, like it's in stainless. It's not just
Almost
right.
yeah.
So we're doing that, and then we also are doing some barrel aging sours. So we've got a golden sour with kiwi that we just pulled out of some white oak barrels that is just going to kegs, probably to mostly Toronto and the GTHA. We pulled some stuff out of barrels that had been in there for a couple of years and don't even know what it was, and we're playing with that in the bright tanks and doing a lot of blending with that. And they asked about fooders. I don't know if anyone here is using fooders. You guys are. Oh, there you go.
So I mean, we use our fooder as a
Great segue.
yeah. We use our fooder kind of as a almost like a primary fermenter. I'll knock out a wort into there, depending on what I'm going for. I pitch or I don't pitch. It's got a Escarpment Labs culture actually
Hey,
of
it sure does.
a couple different lactos, a couple different breads.
Yeah, 3 lacto, 4 Brett.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you would know that better than me.
That's a blend.
Custom, almost, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we've done 3 or 4 turns through that now, and once the primary dies down a bit, I'll send that to barrels for further aging. Or, I mean, on the other side of that, about wood fermentation, like this beer right here, Vibrant, spent its entire life in wood puncheon until we bottled it. So we do have not a huge oak barrel program, but
I mean, for our size, it's
for our size,
Yeah.
it is significant. Yeah.
I
And
think
then, Tariq, you have some barrels and stuff too.
Yeah,
You have the
some barrels.
Solera and
Yeah. Well, full disclosure, most of my fermentation happens in plastic tanks, unfortunately. Most of the cideries in Ontario are startups, so we're all kind of buying plastic tanks essentially because they're a quarter of the price. But plastic has like an interesting thing that's similar to oak in that it is porous on a very, very small level, so it does allow oxygen in. You just don't get those oak characters. So I do have some actual wood barrels as well, and I am bringing a fruiter in from France in the next few months. But yeah, as far as like sour stuff aging, we were just talking about this earlier, but I've got a Perry that's gone a little acidic, and pears are interesting because they have an unfermentable sugar called sorbitol. It's actually a sugar alcohol, and I think there's like one strain of pedio or lacto that can ferment sorbitol, but it's really hard.
It'd be pretty rare.
Yeah, it was a positive on one of those charts on like either Sour Beer Blog or PhD in Beer, I forget which one. But anyways, sorbitol adds a little bit of sweetness, and then it had an acidic character as well. So it was kind of similar to a Flanders Red in that sense, without the red. So that's kind of what I've got going in my barrels right now.
so. Kevin,
Someone knows one of the most watched live milk funds.
Oh.
hey.
That's exciting.
All right.
my mom's got like 4 computers on
Yeah.
her.
We're drinking a Block 3 Vibrant. This is really good, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, is there any left?
yeah.
Oh yeah. You can, you can have mine if you
Here,
want.
take mine here.
We have lots of it.
Oh,
So
Yeah, I like this, man.
thank you. Yeah. So that beer was a collaboration with a winemaker friend of ours. So he gave us the puncheons. We made kind of his recipe and used his house culture and our house culture, and kind of combined everything. So we brewed that in December into the puncheons, and they fermented so violently that they actually hit the roof with the kreuzen, which was fun. I think 4 different people came in to mop that day. I woke up to a text that just said it's on the fucking roof, and I was like, all right, I'll be there. But now it's what, April 10th?
Yeah, so we're looking at March 21st, I think.
March 21st was the release date, so it's bottle conditioned for just about a month. Yeah. And then I think it's just gotten better and better.
Yeah, I mean, I think we put. We originally.
Party foul.
Yeah, I get that. We originally put.
My wife doesn't call me on my phone.
We originally put like the grapefruit and.
Yeah, there
lemongrass.
was grapefruit and lemongrass in there, but I don't think you really
Get
get
that in.
any of that because it's been so long since it was
Yeah.
first brewed.
Yeah.
But our winemaker friend Casey, I don't know if he'll watch this, he might. But his thing about when he makes Brett beers is that Brett will work with citric acid to make some kind of unique esters, phenols, things like that. So
Yeah, I guess it's pretty cool, like little floral kind of perfumey things.
Well, I mean, you have citric acid is naturally present in lambic, for example, so there's probably some basis for that idea.
Sure.
Yeah, totally. And it's a tasty beer. by
Yeah,
the way.
it worked
Like,
out, so
it has
I'm
I
not gonna
really
argue
like
with
the level of tannins in this is like super spot on for a barrel aged saison. Often it's too high or it's not there at all.
Mhm.
And I like that I smell oak and I also taste oak.
Thank
That's
you.
really cool.
So, question for you guys, not to jump the queue, but I'm here, so screw those people. So I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who's in the, she doesn't work in the industry, she works part-time in the industry, but she's, a hardcore sour and funk beer drinker, and she asked me, she said, why don't you think there's any innovation in Ontario brewing? Which I was a little taken back by because I don't agree with that statement, but I sort of see where she was going in terms of, you look to the States and like you can get any kind of beer you want in the world down there, whereas up here, brewers like us who are doing this stuff is still fairly new and still very niche. We're like a niche of a niche. And I'm wondering, like, why do you guys think that is? Is it just because we're Ontario and we're always 5 years behind? Is it because of the LCBO?
I have a thing I'll just jump into real quick
What?
before we all just shit on the LCBO.
Let's not shit on the LCBO. Let's start off by praising them. When they bring in the unique and the interesting stuff, the price point that we can buy it at here in
Yeah.
Ontario is
We were talking
far
about that
not-
before, yeah.
Oh yeah.
way better than
Oh
anywhere
yeah,
else.
it's like
You're right,
350
it's true.
Orval. It's
Yeah,
lovely.
yeah, you get
Yeah.
Orval for 350
Yeah,
a
you
bottle.
get a
That'd be like
700 ml,
$2
750 ml bottle of Chimay Blue for $11.
Right, but that's
$10.
bringing stuff in. What about stuff that's made here?
So,
and what are they doing to encourage
This
that?
is a very, very big province.
So should we explain for people that are not from Ontario? The LCBO is in Ontario. There's 3 places you can buy beer: the LCBO, Liquor Control Board of Ontario; the beer store, which is owned mostly by Anheuser-Busch, InBev, and Molson Coors, or whatever the big names are now. And then the brewery's own store, and that's it. You can't open a private beer store. So in order to get beer on the shelves to the retailers, the biggest thing to go through is the government. So they control that. So
But yeah, so we have a very, very large province.
A large country with a smaller population.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
huge,
don't have the density for.
huge country, very small population, even our province. So we did a beer festival in Sudbury and tried a whole bunch of new beers, right? That just will never ever be in the GTA. They can't supply that size of population,
they can't drive it down.
and they can't drive it down because it is an 8-hour drive from Sault Ste. Marie to Toronto. And even for us, it's like 2.5 hours in traffic to get to downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
So we don't even distribute our beer to Toronto.
Yeah.
So yeah, your friend might be like, oh yeah, no one's doing innovative things. I mean, come up to our brewery. We got 12 taps. Like,
So you can blame the province for creating really poor transit infrastructure, really.
sure.
Yeah, it's,
Highway
it's,
6
Who do we
is only
blame
one
for that?
lane.
it's funny the way it's different between ciders and beers, because like we can't have a bottle shop unless we have 5 acres of orchard attached to our production facility. So in my case, my distribution is just kegs to bars and restaurants for the most part, and I'm like forced to do that drive and make it happen. But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it is. It's one of those things where like it's not so much that there's no innovation in Ontario. There's not as much innovation on the shelves of the LCBO. But
Right.
if you go,
that's what I'm saying.
yeah,
That's
if
a
you're
better way to
going
put it.
directly to the source, you're
Okay,
gonna
I've got
see
a
the cool
question.
stuff.
I think, can you all self-distribute? I mean, can you sell beer here?
Yes.
Your own beer here, so you can self-distribute
Yeah, so
inside the brewery.
that's the third option that he mentioned
Yeah.
there. So
Okay.
that's the brewery retail store.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can all sell at our brewery retail store. We can all sell at
Directly to a
Except for
bar.
you.
yeah,
We can
That's right.
we can sell directly to a bar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to the bars.
yeah.
So you can take your kegs, like.
That's my entire business.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
But you don't have to go through a distributor to do it, you can just.
No.
check
No.
yourself. Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's pros and cons to every system,
Right.
right? So if you were to talk to breweries in the U.S., I'm sure there would be a bunch of them that complain about the 3-tier system that they have there.
Well, and to
where
your
they all have, the margin going through it, even selling through your retail store, sometimes it has to go through a third party distributor in
Yeah.
order to make that happen.
Yeah.
And it's just the levels of margin just get eroded.
I was gonna say, to your point on pricing in Ontario being so much better, like, our most expensive beer I think is $16 at the LCBO. It's our Kentucky Bastard. It's a 14% bourbon barrel aged.
11.9%.
11.9.
14.5 this year. We had to relabel like thousands of bottles. It was a nightmare.
And pay wine tax on it.
It was a nightmare. But we sell it for $15.95, which I think is a good deal. You go down in the States and they're happily buying it for $23 a bottle. We don't see that extra profit. That goes to the third party distributor,
Yeah.
right? But it's that price, like the consumer, we literally have cases of people coming across the border to Windsor to buy cases of our beer because they're saving $6 a bottle and they buy 12 of them, right? Like that's.
I think the moral of that question is that your friend will be seeing a bunch of innovation.
Right.
Very, very shortly.
Yeah, I mean, like Citrus Grove, just hit the LCBO. That's a first drop sour.
Yep, and
Yeah.
Nickel
I've
Brook's
seen-
got how many sour beers
We got
in the summer?
3 sours and a funk going in. We'll have
Yeah.
our cucumber goza and our raspberry sour will be back. And then we've got a mixed pack with 3 sours and a funk, which people are pretty stoked on. So yeah, you got.
Well, we got some questions here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First question is from Per Carlson, and I think you answered this earlier, but can Richard talk about the equipment process used in cultivating yeast bacteria from Petri dish slants to bigger fishes?
This
Nerd
means we can take a
question.
beer. Let's go, boys.
I mean, like that's a question that would take an hour to answer in full and
Yeah.
probably ruin my business. But
Take notes.
in short, it's like
What do you wanna
it's
open?
not the most complicated thing in the world.
You wanna open
Anything we
top?
propagate comes from a plate. So we've got a plate with agar on it, and colonies, struck onto that agar. Start from a colony, go to a small volume of liquid. That small volume of liquid is let to grow, aerobically if it's Brett or sac, and semi-aerobically if it's bacteria. And then you let it grow. You keep an eye on it. You keep growing it up step by step. It's the exact same process as if you're growing up bottle dregs, but with that added step of the isolation and, you know, making sure that you have a maintained stock of pure yeast. And then, you know, from there it gets more complicated. If you've got to grow a 100 hectoliter, 100 barrel pitch of yeast, it gets more complicated. You need a big propagator to do that. So that's where things get more interesting. You have to start thinking about how you're going to do it, what vessel you're going to use, probably a stainless steel tank. You know, how are you going to grow the culture? Are you going to use aeration? Are you going to use an impeller to move it around? You know, there's lots of different strategies that a few of us use, and I mean, there's a few of us that own yeast labs on Milk the Funk, and I've talked to a few people. I think we're all in, like, biology is a good example, like your shirt. Jeff Mello. We all do very, it's interesting to me, I see what these guys are doing. We all do very different things in how we have very different strategies in how we propagate yeast. I don't think anyone's doing the exact same thing, which is kind of interesting to me. It sort of tells you that they're, just like with beer, there's many, many different ways to achieve that end result. Right. It's just like whatever works for you, or like whatever idea you've had to make things efficient is, you know, what works. At the end of the day, you just need to do the tests. You need to test out the yeast, you need to test out the bacteria, and make sure that it does what it's supposed to do 99% of the time, and then hopefully you have a sustainable business from that point.
Can I ask how you got into that business? Like how you decided, obviously you have a science background, but how did you decide, I want to cultivate yeast for beer forever? Maybe not forever, but you know.
Forever.
I don't know about forever.
Well, like how did you decide like that's the direction you wanted to go? Were you just a big beer fan and loved science?
Yeah, so I was doing a research project at the University of Guelph, which is like Canada's food university. We're very proud of that sort of name. We do a lot of really cool food research and like sustainability stuff. I was doing research there in a wine lab. Another guy in the lab is also a big beer nerd. I was homebrewing at the time, so I was basically just like getting you know, the white labs and yeast things. And because I had some microbiology background, I was like streaking out those yeast and started, you know, banking them. And it sort of came from that. It's this other guy, Angus, my co-founder, seeing me doing this and saying, hey, you know what, you know, you shouldn't just do this for homebrewing. Maybe we can monetize this. And I was like, okay,
there's money in these yeasts.
let's give that a shot. And now here we are 3 years later.
And thank God you are, because I've used a lot of your bread.
Yeah, and I'm glad. And we get to do cool stuff. We get to find, you know, I've since become obsessed with that process. I'm still obsessed with the process of finding and banking yeast from new places, new locations, new niches. So we have like 700 things in the yeast bank right now, whether it's yeast and bacteria. We're still looking for new things, new strains to try out, new species, and there's always something new to play around with. You know, we've been very fortunate to start to explore some of the sort of fringes of yeast and fermentation now.
And do people send you stuff? Because I think I've heard at least one case, Peter from People's Pint, I can't remember his last name. Partnered with Pietro, friends with Doug Appledorn.
Yes.
He was saying he like put something out in his lawn for a couple of days to cool, and it ended up growing something, and he sent it to you, and you like.
Yeah. Peter's he's a Toronto home brewer. He's probably on Milk the Funk. He had a wild inoculation. I think it was like an accidental thing too. Like he just like left some word out or something.
Yeah, or I think he like put it, he just like wanted to see what happened, or he needed to cool,
or
and
he
he
just
forgot
wanted
it or
to,
something.
and he ended up getting a fermentation, and it was a nice yeast, and he used it a couple times, and he gave me some, I don't know if it was bottle dregs or yeast dregs, and I grew that up. I looked at it, I streaked it out onto agar plates, and like, oh, you've got basically a clean yeast culture here, even though it started from a wild thing, just because of having hops and stuff like that. So I was able to bank down his yeast, and it's a nice little saison-y kind of yeast.
Yeah.
But he got it from
Toronto
his Toronto farmhouse sales. Got it from his backyard.
That's crazy.
Okay, let's talk about this beer we're drinking right now.
Sure.
It's called
So this is Series, and this is the new label here.
Looks dope.
So this is Dan Brandon, local artist, is doing our labels now. Super rad dude. It's our cucumber lime goza. So it's a goza with pink Himalayan sea salt and coriander, and then we add cucumber juice, lime juice, and lime zest. We've been using lime juice that we get from a supplier, but John just bought a industrial juicer, and as he always loves to do, he wants to do everything himself, which is sort of how we got here, which is awesome. And we're actually getting off cucumbers, so the cucumbers that are too ugly to sell, they're perfectly fine, they just don't look good. We're going to start using those to create our cucumber juice. So we're actually A, we're getting a better deal on cucumbers, and B, we're helping reduce food waste, which is really awesome.
Can I give a shout out on this beer? Because the first time I had this beer was at Sawdust City's Funk Fest.
Yeah.
Last year, Canada Day. Amazing.
It's-
This is a summer like crusher.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Looking for a
heavy
long
duty
haul.
summer
Yeah,
crusher.
it's
Oh my
3.9%, so it's super light. I personally like throwing a shot of gin in there
Ooh.
because it's 3.9%. But yeah, it'll be in the LCBO this summer, which we're pretty stoked on. And yeah, it's
Oh my God.
it's one of those beers that like people are like, oh, what is it? You're like, it's cucumber lime, and they're like, that sounds weird, and it is, but it's really tasty.
It's
It's
kind of like a margarita thing. I
yeah,
think.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, like gin
it's sort of
and tonic.
cocktaily,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Gin smash, mojito sort of thing going on. So yeah, we're pretty stoked on it. It's fun, and it's something that like we're talking about how sours are growing in Ontario. I feel like there's a lot of people who don't drink beer who will drink stuff like this, who will drink stuff like the
Yeah.
Citra Grove, who like those flavors that they don't associate those flavors with beer, right? Because their idea of beer is MGD or
We found-
Old Milwaukee.
We found in the States that a lot of women like
Yeah.
the sour beers
Yeah.
because they like wine,
Yeah.
and
They're-
those
they're-
sour beers
yeah.
are similar to the wine. And when I've served at beer festivals for different brewers, especially when they started doing Berliner Weisses and things like that, you'd see a lot
Yeah.
women line up in line, and they loved it. So
Well,
it's always
We found that as well. Actually.
Yeah, we get that actually all the time with this one, the thaw, because it's got peaches and apricots and was Asian Chardonnay
they
barrels.
like, and a lot of fruit beers are women too. So
Yeah.
Well, I've seen with the Fickle Mistress too. Actually.
Yeah, we have a dry hop kettle sour that, honestly, probably more women than men like it.
Yeah.
Which is neither here nor there. It's just an
That's
interesting
fine.
point.
Yeah,
It's like,
why
wow.
not?
Well, the
Yeah.
Society of Beer Drinking Ladies, who I will give a shout out because they're awesome.
Boom.
They hold
Yeah.
their events every month, and they do a big festival. And we have had huge like we only bring sours to those festivals now because that's what they want, and it's awesome seeing that part of the market grow because we all know that the Ontario craft beer market is 75% dudes, mostly dudes with beards.
Yeah, but mine's the
Yeah,
biggest.
closest,
Mine's the
closest to
biggest.
not having a beard.
there's a question about that thing.
But yeah, so it is. We're I think you guys we're all probably seeing that we're able to get a wider
Yeah.
demographic through those beers, and it's not that we're making girly beers. We're just making beers we like that more people tend to like, and that's pretty awesome to see.
Okay, let's get back to questions. Matt Dormingan, I can't even say his name. He goes, I always hear breweries around me talking about Brett, PDO, and lacto as well. Those are the cultures I can purchase for homebrewing. However, when I snoop around Milk the Funk, start seeing more and more about alternate microbes like Schizosaccharomyces, Wicker, Pichia,
Yeah. The second.
Science stuff.
Yes.
He says, basically the question, do you think we'll start seeing some more of these microbes outside of the lacto, PDO, Brett market that, and we're reading more about some of the guys who are experimenting, or actually getting lacto-producing sac strains and things like that. Yeah. We've reading a lot about that, but
Yeah.
Justin Amaral and all those guys, yeah.
Yeah, so I can talk a bit about that. It's not, even if we look at traditional sour beers, it's not just sac, lacto, Brett, PDO. There's other players involved. If you look at lambic, for example, you have tons and tons and tons of microbes that potentially contribute to the flavor of that beer that we don't really often see included in commercial yeast blends. And a lot of the times that's for safety reasons. You're not going to go and put Enterobacter in a sour blend unless you're crazy, because that could cause some problems. You're not going to go put E. coli in your sour beer.
Don't tell me what I'm not going to put in my sour beer.
It's
Maybe it tastes
there's
great.
the problematic areas there, but then you look downstream, even in lambic, you have stuff that's in there like the Hansenia spora and Pichia that are present there in those beers. There's enough studies of people monitoring these things over time. These things are there, and they're not really being included in a lot of the commercial blends. So I think that as some of us yeast lab guys get interested in these alternative microbes, because like Brett is already kind of alternative. These things are like super underground. As we start getting interested in them and testing them out, we find things that work or interesting ideas, then we can extend that to these guys and say, hey, do you want to try this crazy Pichia? It kind of just has a super intense floral flavor. Is there something you could do with that? And they might say, yeah, let's try something with that. And that's sort of really bridging the gap, because we have access to all these things already. We have tons and tons and tons of these alternative yeasts, but we in a lot of cases don't know what to do with them. So it comes down to doing the testing and doing the research, or just throwing some stuff in a growler and seeing what comes out at the end, which is often what my R&D comes down to. Testing out different strains of yeast in primary fermentation or mixed fermentation and see if the results are any different. So, I mean, I think there's some interest in this stuff. I've heard a lot of breweries, I've had some breweries contact me about the sour yeast, the lactic acid yeast, the Lachancias, and those are really cool. I mean, you can get some interesting results with them, and we're starting to explore those, and some of the other alternative yeast that might have added extra flavor. And I know Matt, for example, he's a home brewer around here, and he actually gave me some wild samples, I don't know if it was wild capture of fruit, but I isolated some yeast from that, and it was not just sac, but also Hansenia spora, and I blended these two things and gave them to him, and he's been keeping this thing as a mixed culture, and he gets some really interesting results from them, some additional floral estery flavor that you might not get from sac alone. So that's a good example of a very simple mixed culture, just two things that can sort of have a unique character, and we'll probably see more of that start to develop as the yeast labs become more differentiated and niche and competitive.
Are we gonna have like the beer hipster community show up where it'd be like, oh, I was using that yeast before it was cool, like. That,
I mean,
like I heard of that band before you knew about them. Now you're gonna have like
We
guys.
are the beer.
That's definitely a thing. That's a cultural thing in craft beer. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know.
Now, do you guys?
We all like to be there first.
I was gonna say, do you guys think like because sour beers and funk beers are kind of the hipster thing in a way? Like, do you think they'll ever?
Hazy IPA is the new one.
Oh yeah, the milkshake IPAs and all that.
Yeah, we're over sours. We're over sours.
But do you think they'll ever become as like I hate like you always see that article, are sours the next IPA? No. But do you think they'll ever break through the I don't know what the glass ceiling of beer?
I don't think so. I mean, even if you go to Belgium, like where kind of
sours are born.
Yeah, the number one selling beer there is still Jupiler.
Yep.
Right. It's a lager.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that being a lager.
No, there's nothing wrong. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just I think it just comes down to the, we like the sour, yes, but like if I'm sitting there on the patio all day crushing beers, am I going to be throwing back 10 sour beers?
And that's something misconception about is that sour beers are like puckeringly sour.
No.
And a lot of these guys, Rodenbach, he's saying like 3.5 pH. Ignoring total acidity, 3.5 pH is generally where people have an acceptable level of acidity. Mm-hmm. You push it past there, and you're kind of into your hops sour arms race. You're pushing it for reasons that aren't really related to flavor.
Right.
100%. I like my sour beer is actually more in the tart range than the sour. It should be an aspect of the beer, but it shouldn't be the dominating aspect. Same way that you don't want your IPAs to be dominated by bitterness. Mm-hmm. You don't want your sour beers to just be straight acid.
So IBUs are pretty well known about. Do you think pH is going to be the next thing that we're putting on all our labels?
I hope not, God.
No. I think
Milk the Funk talks a lot about TA, right?
Yeah. A few guys have started doing TA, like what's his name, Jim at Barstone.
Excuse me, what is TA?
Total acidity, or
gotcha.
some people might say titratable acidity. It's literally measuring how many grams of
it's
acid.
It's from the wine world, really.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But
I'm gonna crack this.
even there, it's like
We're kinda
building
talking
on
about right
wine.
now.
You've got a lot of difference in intensity perception between lactic acid and malic acid, and
there's
the
different
other, the other
acids.
acid, the tartaric acid, for example, that you want.
with a different perception to them.
Yeah.
Right?
But,
So I don't think that needs to be on a label. It's kind of cool when it is, but it's a very nerdy thing. Like, who puts IBUs on their labels anymore?
yeah.
Come on, guys.
I still do, but it's becoming more and more towards like the 14 to 25 kind of range.
Right, and then you have like a beautiful hop aroma. Right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm chasing. I mean, this one here is 14 or 15 IBUs, and then just a whole lot of.
And it smells like
citra.
sticking your head in a bag of hops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It smells delightful.
So explain this beer a little bit.
Yeah, so this is a Citra Grove, so it's a, and you can call it dry hop sour, but it's really more of a dry hop tart beer. But a dry hop tart sounds like a dessert. So yeah, it's it's just I wanted to get that an acidic aspect to hops. So just got some nice Centennial kind of middle C hops in the whirlpool, and then just a really liberal what is it, about 2 pounds per barrel of dry hop, Citra dry hop. And then some Brettanomyces in there. So I've had this beer. This one here is probably about a month or 2 months old. When it gets to 3 or 6 months, then the Brettanomyces starts doing this little thing in the background. A few other small acids are there. A little bit of like pineapple-y, slightly parmesan kind of funk starts happening, and it does develop in a really nice way. And that's what I like about my beers is that they. I mean, Orval to me is a perfect beer. Like young and fresh, it's one beautiful thing, and every day after that, it's a different beautiful thing.
Right.
And with all my beers, I try and do that. It's gonna have a little voyage, and it will be fairly robust on a fluorescent lit warm shelf that most of my beers end up on.
Did you say this was 2 months old?
I think so, yeah.
Oh my God.
So
It
you-
smells
you've been-
fantastic.
I was gonna say super fresh.
That's
You've
a
been
cool.
aging them then warm and testing those out then, see how they develop.
I've got them in my cellar
Yeah,
at 16
cool.
Celsius right now. And that's what cool thing I love about like Brettanomyces and some of those Belgian, saison strains is they just preserve hops like your straight American and English strains, like they die off the vine in like 3-4 weeks. The saisons, 6 months later, you're like, all right, it's starting to kind of fade a little bit, and then you realize it's 6 months old. Holy shit! Like that's that yeast, and you just Brettanomyces fixes everything.
Yeah, I just learned that from my brewmat from Patrick, our funk master, as he calls himself. He does. His official title is Funk Master and Head of Barrel Management, MSc. It's on his card. I made his business card, so it's on his card.
So funny.
And when he flexes his muscles, it's called
we
the
call
Funk
that
Master
right
Flex. It's great. But yeah, I just found that out like a month ago about Brett
Yes.
helping maintain hoppiness, and I think that's like
I think it works.
crazy. Yeah, I was gonna say, like you said, it's like sticking your head in a bag of
Yeah.
hops. Like it's so
It smells
fresh.
amazing.
Yeah, I definitely take advantage of that too, just because my tanks are plastic and we have oxidative issues. Brettanomyces preserves everything, fruity flavors, just even not from hops, right? But
Yeah.
we definitely use that to our advantage in the cider as well.
So in the cider world, like you're kind of leading the pack in terms of the sour stuff for a while. I know there's a few
Yeah,
guys
that's
who are
me,
doing
West
it.
Ave, pretty much,
Yeah.
but yeah.
So how have you found people sort of coming around to that as cider grows? How have you found the reception of the sour stuff?
Honestly, it's been amazing. Like, I mean, I've had explosive growth over the last few years. People are super into it. It's because a lot of it is like wine drinkers going to cider, and then that natural, doing experimenting with other kinds of trying to create lactic acidity essentially in cider is almost kind of the same wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I'm still having trouble creating lactic acidity in cider, but but having more success recently. A lot of it's just chatting with Richard about processes. The big issue with us is that we only get fermentable sugar in once a year, essentially, when apples are available. So we do all our experiments once a year, and then, all right, we've learned what we've learned, and then next year we'll do something a little
I got
bit
a question. Do you press all your own apples, or do you?
With his own hands.
No, so so I work with a really good farmer in Thetford, kind of out western Ontario, and I just give him my apple kind of blend. I give him the different ratios of what I want and then how much volume I want, and he presses them for me. He gets to keep the compost on the farm, and then I send a tanker out, picks up the juice, brings it back. I handle fermentation and don't have to deal with the compost. So yeah, it's a bit of a better situation if you don't have a farm like me and like a lot of Ontario cideries. So
Can you talk a little bit about the apples that we have available to us in Ontario and why that sort of has forced you to innovate in other areas?
yeah, totally. Yeah, so and that's something that's like North America in general too,
Yeah.
not just Canada or Ontario. We kind of all right, going back a little bit when Johnny Appleseed, real guy, John Chapman came and planted.
Whoa! Back us up. Johnny Appleseed's a real guy.
Yeah. His name's
Alright.
John Chapman.
I actually know a guy named John Chapman. I'm gonna let him know.
Probably ought to say that. But I'm sailing down the Mississippi, planting orchards for pioneers coming behind him. Those orchards, those apples weren't eating apples; those were to make cider because that was safer to drink than water at that point, right? And that's just traditionally bringing over from Europe. But essentially, bringing over all these European varieties, and then prohibition happens, and all of a sudden, these are the apples you call spitters. So you don't eat them; they're really, really tannic, and you can't eat them out of hand. Yeah, that's what farmers call them.
I'll go there.
I don't know too about spitters, but I
Yeah.
I used to
That's
live
for
on
different. That's for a different site.
Gentlemen.
That's another live video.
Yeah. No, but anyway, so we cut those down during Prohibition because farmers essentially had no market for those apples anymore when you can't make alcohol with them. So what happened is, we've got all these dessert varieties now, and that's kind of what we're trying to use, and they're kind of one-dimensional, a lot of them, right? I mean, you get your russets, you find your, little patches of crab apples that are really nice, but a lot of it's just, Spies, Cortlands, Macs, which are unfortunate, but Honeycrisp. These are very one-dimensional apples. They've got lots of malic acidity, a bit of citric acidity. Usually it's like an 80% malic, 20% citric blend for your average apple, but there's not much else going on in the form of tannin or other aromatics. So Brettanomyces is really something that's awesome to kind of flesh out the body of a cider. I absolutely love it for that reason. And every time I use Brettanomyces, it's a blend of 10 different strains from Richard because of that. I really wanna flesh it out. But
Have you got a good hookup for russet apples?
I used
got
to.
a guy?
I did my first year, but the last 2 years have been really terrible.
They're the
It's
world's
been
greatest
terrible.
apple.
Yeah.
If you have a lot of malic acid in there, is that something like, I don't know a lot about making cider, but the malolactic fermentation, like,
Yeah.
is that your goal, is to get more lactic acidity than malic?
So my goal is to get is to produce lactic acidity because they do taste very, very different. We were talking more tart than sour. You were saying, or someone was saying with a beer. I can't even remember which one it was. Mark was saying that, yeah. And I totally agree with that distinction. Malic to me tastes tart, whereas lactic tastes sour. So I did a control and experiment batch with lactobacillus earlier this year. It was like 50 hec control and 50 hec experiments because these are the size of experiments.
Why not, right?
Right, that's the size of a tank, so why not? But anyways, so we did. It was lactobacillus plantarum from Richard, pitched in one of them. I cranked up the temperature of my building to 20 degrees because I can't control temperature in the plastic tanks. And then when I did it, when I pitched the lactobacillus, I bubbled CO2 through it, just listening to the Sour Hour and that whole bubble CO2 to it to discourage yeast, essentially, because there's no complex sugars, right? It's like there's simple sugars, and whatever eats it will eat it. So I did it next side by side with a Sauvignon Blanc yeast experiment, and then I did eventually pitch that same Sauvignon Blanc strain in the lactobacillus cider. And tasting them after the fact, they both ended up at 3.5 pH. But I didn't do TA. I didn't do a TA reading on it. I still could, I guess. But the lactobacillus cider had like a noticeable more sour taste, and I had a couple of different. I had Steven from Arabella Park actually came by and filled some barrels with me. Yeah. He was like, "This tastes sour," and we did the pH reading together, and he was like, "That's really weird." But anyway, I'm assuming
He would have loved that too.
Yeah. He was all over.
You would have geeked out all over that.
Yeah. But I mean, I assume the lactobacillus created some lactic acidity on its own from the fermentable sugars, but I think a lot of it was malolactic fermentation. And lately, I'm finding like it's just nutrition really. And cider is very nutrient deficient, nitrogen especially, but then trace minerals as well. And winery or wine suppliers, I guess, actually will sell you mineral blends essentially or nutrient blends for your bacteria. They're mostly for Enococcus, but I'm going to try them with lactobacillus next year.
Yeah.
That's
And there's certain things lacto needs, right?
Yeah,
it
totally.
needs quite a bit of, quite a bit more nitrogen than yeast in a lot of cases. So.
I didn't realize that.
Definitely, it has its own nutritional needs.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna try and use these guys' nutritional compounds to see.
yeah, if they've got an Enococcus nutrient,
Yeah.
it's probably okay for lactose.
I would assume so.
Yeah.
That's the next plan for next year, and then also to do some stainless kind of kettle sour, I guess, because I'm having trouble with getting lacto to take.
Well, we got a bunch of questions here. Next question comes from the Milk the Funk superstar Dan Pigsley. If it wasn't for Dan Pigsley,
Yeah.
Milk the Funk.
Just shout out to Dan. Round of applause.
Dan.
Absolutely. And his question is for Richard. What research is your lab working on in regards to Brettanomyces lab or LAY? Is that
I think he means lactic acid yeasts.
Yeah, okay. And what can we look forward to seeing this year regards to new information? Is that question good?
Dan, I think I tell you all these things. So we have a lot of cool research collaborations. So the lab that I came out of, that lab that was originally a wine yeast research lab, I worked very hard to convert it over to beer. It's still not fully a beer yeast research lab, but the lab of George Vandermerve at Guelph is doing a lot of beer yeast research now. There's a master's student there and a couple undergrads that are doing beer projects, and we sort of work with them collaboratively to find grant funding and find people to do research to learn more about a lot of these organisms, like especially with Brett. We've been pretty successful with the Brett project, and we've been doing Brett research for a while. We're just about to publish our first paper on Brett, and there's a little bit more on the way, and we're doing some more research with moving on from that with mixed culture fermentations, trying to understand the metabolics of mixed culture fermentations over time, and then also doing some work with the Kvike yeasts, these crazy Norwegian superhero yeasts that I think that the world needs to know a little bit more about, because they're really special, and it's really cool what the Norwegians have preserved in their brewing history. So we're doing some projects with those yeasts as well.
So are you guys, I assume you guys have just like a massive bank of all of your specimens, right? Like I'm just
I
imagining.
mean, it's not massive. It's like, each one is like,
Right.
It's this tiny little tube.
But is there like a failed, like, like there's like seed banks where they see,
Yeah.
like, do you guys have that for like, in case there's like a beer apocalypse and we run out of all the yeast?
Yeah, the really, really
Backed
important,
up?
I'll say the really, really important stuff is backed up. Not all of it. That's a project for me this summer, is to back up the whole collection in a couple places. But the really commercially important stuff to us is backed up.
How many strains are you at now?
We're almost at 700 right now, and there's some duplicates.
Yeah,
If we pull Brett from one American brewery, it's probably the same as Brett from another American brewery in a lot of cases. So like there are some duplicates, and so we sort of have to go through and like fingerprint all the strains too, and figure out who is who.
Do you still have that Brett that I gave you from that spontaneous ferment that we did on the Kentucky Sour, I think it was?
I'd have to look it up.
I don't know.
To the database.
I honestly don't know.
I forgot about it as well. But now I'm thinking about it. I gotta get that back.
He's like, I kind of might need that.
Okay, we got a next question, and this is about the beers. He goes, how important are the beers in maintaining your respective house sour cultures? Do you avoid wash and trim them during spontaneous fermentation season?
I have a $40 haircut tomorrow,
Yes.
so it's
$40, that's a good
yeah,
deal.
I know, get a nice trim going.
25 American.
I was gonna say my guy's 60.
I'm starting to get some white hairs in here. I feel like that makes me
Where you
grow
going?
as a brewer.
Crow's Nest in Toronto. It's $60 for shaving
Woo!
a haircut with tip.
All the way to
Tip.
Toronto. Shoot.
Yeah, well,
Shoot.
that's where I live. Gotta get
With
good.
tipping.
I went to KW. It's way cheaper.
Yeah, $20 in gas. I'll be there.
The next question is, what is everybody's thoughts on topping up? I'm assuming filling barrels, or I guess that's what to keep oxygen.
Fun question.
I top up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I top up. That's just, I don't know, something drilled into me by West Avenue Cider, so.
I'm really glad this is a question where I'm completely out of my element.
Yeah.
I really don't like acetic acid.
Good.
Like in any portion really, unless it's like like really almost sub-threshold. So yeah, top up as much as you can. Don't splash around your barrels too much. I handle my beer with kit gloves just to try and avoid that as much as possible.
I do not top up, actually. Granted, our oldest sour in our brewery right now is probably just over a year, so it's something I've considered. But just tasted some barrels today. Things seem to be going well.
I think a lot of the problems that you see with, especially with acetic acid production in beer, in barrels that aren't fully filled, is a lot of the problem is temp swings. If you have a temperature swing that's up and down, then you're more likely to have a lot of gas exchange, a lot of oxygen pulled in and out of the barrel, and that would be more likely to cause acidic problems. I think you guys have a pretty stable barrel room. It's sort of in the middle of the building, right? So
yeah.
that might protect it from temperature swings a little bit more.
I think one of the problems people find with temperature swings and not topping up, and some of you guys might find this if you're ever racking out of a barrel, is you throw the bulldog in, you go to put pressure on it, and it leaks out of the top staves because it's evaporated, no staves has dried up because you haven't really paid attention to those barrels in like 6 months or a year. I do outside to try and swell up the staves again. Our puncheons especially, our foeder, just to keep the stuff that's not in contact with liquid the whole time swelled up. And like, I mean, if you can move the rung, your barrel's too dry, and if you can see between the staves, it's too dry. So if your top staves are looking a little like there's a gap in there, you know, like these barrel tables that we have here, that's no good. That's no bueno. That
It's
will
fine
not,
for tables.
It's great for a table, but that will not hold pressure with a bulldog thrown through it, right?
I mean, but generally, if you keep your barrels in oak at like 15 Celsius, 80%, 90% humidity, it's pretty damp and cool. That's just the best condition for your oak.
Are you guys like building in temperature control? And of course you are.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So one big thing we had, and you know, we start off saying 15 degrees Celsius, 89% humidity, and then we're like, oh, let's put in a nice big window so everyone can see what we're doing. Oh. And then we're like, oh, that's kind of a bad idea. But it's all right. If the food is down this end, we're okay. And then the shell game starts. We'll move things around for the brewery, and then we end up with our fooders in front of our window. And then so last week, I'm talking to Rudy at Rodenbach in Roeselare, and
Name drop.
and I had that moment walking through his cellar, like, it's cool and damp here. I can make mine cool and damp as well. So right away, we're on the phone to the contractor, like, tear out the window. Yeah, it's dark and damp now. So
and then you got like a walk-in humidor too, so you're all set.
Yeah. So hopefully,
so when weed gets legalized in Ontario, you can start with
Yeah.
that there.
So how do you guys, and this topic comes off Milk the Funk, so we might as well bring it up. How do you guys taste the beer in your barrels? Do you use Vinny nails or?
Vinny nails, yeah.
Vinny nails?
Yeah.
I'm in the process of converting to Vinny nails.
I have Vinny nails because all mine are ex-Nickel Brook nails.
Hey, we throw those nails in for free.
I appreciate it.
Okay, let's go real quick to what we're drinking right now.
We're on to the
Thaw.
Yeah, we're drinking a thaw. It's our saison aged in Ontario Chardonnay barrels and then re-fermented on apricots and peaches.
This is delicious.
Thank you.
Nothing's
Really
bad
is.
yet.
Yeah, very apricot, yeah. I like it.
Well, this is the key point, Art.
Yeah, really.
Beer is really good here, but we're Canadian and we're really modest.
Yeah.
So it's not like if you're in America and you're making really good sour beer, you're gonna be like, yeah, man, my beer's the best.
That's right.
You would not do that here. You'd be like, it's okay. I hope you like it. Like
We were speaking briefly about how the LCBO is like sometimes a lot cheaper. That beer is $7 for a 500 ml bottle.
Wow, that's $7 Canadian, so that would be
Like
$6.
you can't even get across the Jersey Turnpike.
And I think in Ontario, there's this, fun in the States, there's a polarization of the price point. It's either a $4 bottle or a $20 bottle.
Yeah.
Whereas in Canada, like my Citra Grove there, $7.50 is $10.95.
Yeah.
Everything kind of tends towards the middle,
Right.
and even then, I consider it to be at the high end of beer pricing.
Yeah, because we're just exposed to that.
Yeah, but it'll change. I think with maturity in the beer market, I think we'll get that higher end price.
Yeah.
But right now, yeah, we're still young and.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think price is really an issue. It's like we managed to make money off that, so that's what we charge for that, and that's what we're fine with. And we sell most of our stuff over the bar, which is where your margins are. So I'm comfortable with that. We're all comfortable with that. I know you have a completely different
not for us.
At least you're able to self-distribute, so you're not.
Yeah.
Exactly. Go and pick up.
That is a very
Similar
different
question.
issue.
I think y'all briefly touched on this earlier, but one thing you want to know is any of your beer available in the United States?
Yeah, we sell to the New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio. Oh, I'm missing one. Someone's gonna. We're in 5 northeastern U.S. states. So the cucumber goza and the raspberry sour will both be down there this summer. Maybe the mix pack as well with the 2 others. But yeah, we're in about 5 U.S. states, and it's
Anybody else?
worse.
Maybe once we get up and running, we should be up and running in September. But we've got a fairly big facility, so that we can spend more time on the oak stacks and less time in brew house. But still, we've got 1,500 hectoliters of food space, so that's a lot of oak space to kind of move around. And you do have to go further afield to find your clientele for that kind of those kind of beers. So yeah, we might end up down there, sooner rather
You
than
guys
later.
are only 20 minutes from the border.
And I should
Yeah,
notice
yeah.
that, Richard,
Yeah.
can they,
Just
people in the
wondering.
United States buy Escarpment Labs yeast?
Not currently, no.
Okay.
We're
I
still
wasn't sure. I
still
didn't think
working
so, but-
still working on the export plan, but at the same time, we're pretty proud to be something special that Canadian breweries have. I think that's cool too. Sort of gives them a little bit of an edge. So
It's a
you
perfect,
know.
perfect segue into the beer you just opened too.
perfect segue to the beer we
Yeah.
just opened.
Good.
That's a
What is
beer
this?
called it's called Best Case Ontario. It's a result of a collaboration that happened during the Canadian Brewing Awards last year, which is also our main brewing conference. So it's like the Canadian version of the CBCs.
Get it out.
So
Yeah, you can get that.
it's a lot smaller, and there's still a lot of drinking. It's a good time. This is a collab we did at Four Winds Brewing in Delta, BC. It was a collab between us and a few breweries in Ontario, including Nickel Brook, as well as Great Lakes Brewing and Sawdust City Brewing, who I also have a can from as well.
We were there. We were just.
And Block 3
Very
came. These guys
inebriated.
came out. They hung out. Same thing with Royal City Brewing in our town at Guelph. And so this is a beer we made. These guys in Four Winds, they really wanted to showcase Ontario ingredients in this beer. So Sam from Sawdust brought over some Ontario hops from Clear Valley, which is one of the top hop suppliers in Ontario. And we brought over some yeast, some actual Ontario Brettanomyces, Brett that's been isolated from barrels of Ontario wine, because we have a really big wine production industry in Ontario as well. So we managed to sort of get some bready barrel samples and isolate the yeast, and those have made it into a few of our products. So you're really tasting the Ontario, some product of Ontario hops, some product of Ontario Brett. The beer was aged in foeder for about, I think, 6 or 8 months, and then bottle conditioned for a few months as well before packaging. So
Is this the first release of this? Just
Uh,
now, or?
yeah, just a few
So
weeks
nice.
ago.
Just
Yeah,
on,
'cause
on the eve of the Canadian Brewing Awards of 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I saw a couple bottles of that in our lab that someone had dropped off for Patrick, and I saw it. And I just I really want to.
It's got a
Didn't
huge
think I'd ever
like
taste it, so.
honeydew
Honey
melon.
melon, yeah.
It's very yeah. The thing I like about it is it's different. It's not what you expect from just like a foeder fermented saison. Like to me, it's a little bit more
The
a
oak
little more
interplays well
restrained,
with
not
the Brett.
super funky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
There's some
Yeah.
pear and some vanilla. It was a new,
Yeah, I was gonna say,
oak
I
foeder.
got
It's
some,
the first
like-
fill on the oak
Oh,
foeder,
really?
So
That's cool.
um,
I remember that.
Yeah, you definitely get a lot of the oak and the vanilla and that sort of like spicy note in the back end on like the aroma there.
I got a question for y'all. I'm a huge fan of ice wine, and this is the ice wine capital right around this.
Yeah, I
Yes.
agree, yeah.
And I had a beer from Napa Smith Brewing, just said it as a home brew. He did it like it's a barley wine porter mix, and he took the grapes that had the fungus on, I forget the name of the fungus.
We're trying to.
Yeah, and put it was one of the favorite beers I've ever had all time. And he served it at a little homebrew festival. But have any of y'all ever done anything with the grapes, with the I'm sure you have.
Well, yeah, I mean, so in Quebec, they actually invented ice cider. So cryoconcentration is it's a technique that Quebecers did invent.
Which is crazy delicious.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Oh,
so
I
good.
can't
Ice
I was
cider is
expecting
awesome.
anything.
I mean, yeah.
So how does that work?
The difference being that in ice wine, the grapes are frozen on the vine,
Right.
and then you crush them versus freezing the must.
The juice, yeah.
juice.
So and botrytis is a different thing entirely too. So that's just drying out the grapes with this fungus.
Right.
But yeah, so ice wine, grapes sit on the vines. In
And
the
it's
winter.
like, and from what I've read, when they do that, you got like an hour or two to pick them.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah,
You
in
have
order
to
to call it
say,
ice
yeah,
wine, it
no,
has to be
yeah.
picked during a certain.
It has to be under, or it has to be -8 Celsius.
for a certain
yeah,
number.
there's a
well,
certain
for-
temp
yeah.
window.
Yeah.
So they end up doing it like in the middle of the night in January. Like it's crazy.
And then, like,
It's
they
amazing.
might
It's one of my
do it.
favorite things to drink in the world. A good Canadian ice wine
Oh
is.
my god.
If y'all haven't had Canadian ice wine, pull out your wallet too,
It's-
because it ain't gonna be cheap.
It's really funny that you say that though, because like, I'm pretty sure my parents have had the same bottle of ice wine in their fridge for like 20 years.
It's super funny.
It's,
It's like,
it's not a good.
we don't appreciate it here. Like
Really?
you can go to like a high-end restaurant. They won't have any ice wine on the menu, but they'll have like 7 ports.
I was
Yeah.
down in Florida taking out some really good customers. I mean, running a really big credit card bill one night, and we'd had wine, all this kind of stuff, and I broke out, and I forget, it starts with S, I think. It's one of the big brands. It's like $60 a bottle in American stores. But I broke it out. Everybody loved it. We just had 2 ounces each because it cost $60. No, at the restaurant it's $150 a bottle. And I think my boss would kill me for anything else, but even people who didn't like to drink had ice wine. It was perfect. It's a perfect dessert.
Sure.
It's so
Yeah.
sweet, and so if
Super
you guys
delicious.
out there like really sweet dessert
Yes.
wines,
I gotta go get that bottle from my parents' basement. That's anyone in the skillet's gonna be worth.
Like what is it? Like a 375 ml skinny
Yeah,
bottle?
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
$60.
It's crazy.
Has anyone in Ontario made anything like with like beer with ice wine, or like did they
So-
barrel
you
age
can't
ice wine?
add
Ice wine
wine,
like,
or in states I know you can't add alcohol.
Correct.
We
Yeah, you
cannot
can.
add
But
wine.
you might be able to add the grapes.
We-
you get the grapes.
I was
The
gonna
must,
say,
yeah.
we
When do you guys
use
want to do
grape
collaboration
must.
with some ice?
There you go. There you go.
We used grape must in our whiny bastard. We aged it in Pinot Noir
A
barrels.
lot of people use grape must, but that-
Yeah.
Yeah, it
but
can't
I've
be
never
fermented.
done. I've never done.
You can't
I don't
add the
think we've ever
fermented
done.
part.
There's an idea, man. You can call.
Yeah, it's not barreled.
Yeah.
so-
We're gonna call it Rebel Cider. Be like, hey, someone's some
I mean,
frozen
I'd love to.
cider.
If any ice wine producers are listening to this,
Yeah.
Kevin at block3brewing.ca.
what if it's like, yeah, just spontaneously fermenting? Does that count? You haven't added yeast.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
So
Big Head does.
I don't wanna say this
They'll
on
do.
camera.
He's doing some things in his basement that I'm not talking about.
Except I.
This question's for Richard.
It's
Can you talk
surprising.
about isolating wild yeast like the one Escarpment did for Big Spruce in Nova Scotia?
Oh yeah, Big Spruce. Yeah. Shout out to Cape Breton Island. Very lovely place in Canada.
Yeah.
If you ever want to visit, it's one of the most picturesque places in the country.
Is it the
Anyway, go
eastern
on.
most-
Is that the question or
No,
The
the question
was,
is-
can you talk about isolating the wild? How do you isolate the wild?
So that was a really fun project. So we shipped a whole bunch of sterile tubes to Jeremy at Big Spruce, and they shipped back 50 of these tubes filled with different fruits, different plants that they found around the area, the property that their brewery's on. So they had like raspberries, crab apples, all sorts of blackberries, tree bark, all sorts of stuff. And then we sort of went through our typical isolation process, which is adding basically sterile wort, a little bit of alcohol in it to keep some of the bacteria down. So you have some alcohol, you have some IBUs, keeps the bacteria down a bit. It's really simple, honestly. We let that sit until we see signs of fermentation. Once we see signs of fermentation, we start plating it out. So we start sampling from those, every day, every few days, until we get yeast. And then eventually through this whole process, and you see succession in each one too. You might have, one kind of yeast on day 3, and then a different kind of yeast on day 7 from one sample. So we sort of do this over time, end up with a whole bunch. That project, we had 50 yeasts from 50 samples. We sort of then try to bring that number down into a manageable size. So we screen them, see which ones are alcohol tolerant, which ones will grow in maltose. Brought that down to 10 for that project, and then we grew them up and sent them to Big Spruce, and they tested them out, and they said, okay, 8 of these are not so good, but these 2 we can work with, and that's pretty normal for one of these projects. You have to start from a pretty massive number of samples, say 50 yeasts, bring it down to 10, then bring it down to 1 or 2, and that's your winner. And that tends to be pretty normal for one of these wild projects, and that's sort of how you end up with good quality wild yeast that can actually be used to make commercial beer.
Is that similar to what we did back in the day at Wellington?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. 100%. So that was
apples to
the
oranges,
very
like-
first example. Is where we went out and we swabbed apples, and actually the winner apple came from a russet apple, because that's
From one
that's
of my
Money
that's
apple
suppliers.
right
Russet
there.
for the win.
One of my
and
We're gonna buy
and we
futures
ended
and
up
russets.
it was the same kind of process. We ended up with I think 8 candidates, and we brought like Angus and I, my co-founder, brought these like 500 ml samples of beers that we fermented in the lab to Wellington Brewery, where Kevin was working at the time, and just had a bunch of guys taste it, a bunch of them taste it, and they said, okay, yeah, most of these are pretty crappy, but this one we can work with. Let's try this one. So that ended up being our first actual branded wild yeast. That's the wild thing. So that's a yeast that came from a russet apple that was used in a collab with Wellington. That's been used extensively by Royal City Brewing. That's been used by Tarek, and then a number of other breweries since then as well in Ontario.
Oh, cool.
Do you guys, to stay on the yeast but away from beer, so I do a lot of sourdough bread making. Do you guys has anyone ever sent you guys like sourdough starter samples? Have you ever done
Yeah.
any of
Yeah.
that kind of
Richard
stuff?
hates bread.
I'm
Richard doesn't eat
also
carbs.
a bread guy. I'm just a carb wizard. As you
It's
can
way better than
tell.
Funkmaster.
Carb wizard.
wizard.
So yeah, I have a house sourdough culture that I grew up in.
Yeah.
every so often I'll go and isolate stuff from it and bank it, and it stays pretty stable. And I've received sourdoughs from other people. Like Angus actually has this, the co-founder actually has a separate. He has his own sourdough culture. So I've isolated stuff.
Who's better?
Yeah,
who's
his as
better?
well.
I need
like,
both.
I like mine better. His gets really sour.
I want both.
Like
That's what you
really
want, man.
lactic.
I'm gonna send you some.
I like
Angus
mine
bread.
better, so I'm a big bread nerd too. So I definitely make sure that I have that, like, because you never know what's gonna happen. You never know if I'm gonna lose it, so I want to make sure I
Yeah.
have that like banked away.
Yeah.
And like,
I
it's
just
interesting to
brought mine
see.
out of the fridge after 2 weeks, and I'm like a little nervous about it, but it's very robust. I'm very.
And it's cool to see what's in there. You get different yeast, different bacteria than you might get in beer too.
Yeah.
Like-
Have you ever
Wait,
tried
crush
to
it
make
here.
beer with a sourdough culture?
Give it a
yes,
little,
I did.
like yeast and suspension.
I want to try it with sourdough.
It stalled out at about 10:30.
Okay,
But
fair enough.
if you've only got simple sugars, it might be okay. It's just
Yeah.
like whatever yeast is in there probably wasn't able to
How long
ferment
was the
the maltose.
Right.
So
So you guys just
malto trials and stuff. So
Yeah, because I
Let's do that.
like that stuff fascinates me. The whole sourdough thing, just having that sitting on your counter all the time,
Yeah.
bubbling away, and it's like.
it's like, and I think a lot of people this is sort of becoming a cultural thing. Is people getting more interested in these? That's amazing. People getting more interested in these.
Yeah,
Actually,
well,
just
and
fermenting
kombucha.
food at home.
Yeah,
You know,
kombucha
it's-
and kimchi are bigger now.
It's so easy, and it's such a powerful thing. It's like you're transforming something simple into something more complex, and
Yeah.
it doesn't really require. It's the same thing with homebrewing.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Sandra
require
Cass-
that. It doesn't
Sandra
require
Cass-
that much effort. So.
Sandra Castle's about 10 miles from me, so.
Oh really?
no way.
Okay.
Wow. As if.
He's like the man.
Yeah.
That guy is a huge
This
inspiration.
next question is for you, Terry.
Sure.
Is there any reason why Perry's and ciders are not blended together by cideries?
We do that in Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
There's no reason.
I don't know whereabouts the Asker is located, but that is done. Yeah, I mean, there's no reason not to do it at all.
Explain a little bit about what you do, why you do it, or what you do, or what
Sure.
you've done.
Yeah. So let's see. With me, I've actually done it just because I ran out of Perry and I really liked Perry. So let's see. A few months ago, I did something I called prosthetic conscience with it was a 10 brett blend from Escarpment, which I've been repitching for a few years now.
I'm curious to see what's left. What won the arms race?
It's almost got like a people like sweaty gym sock kind of thing going on, but I absolutely love it. Yeah, I mean, I did it was like 80% Perry, 20% apple. Just cut through the sweetness a little bit of the residual sugar of the pear.
Did anyone else here have that cider, the prosthetic conscience?
No.
It was
It's
like
a great name, by the
it
way.
was like a
Yeah.
funky mimosa in the best possible way.
Yeah.
It was
So
super
basically,
tasty.
what it was it was a bit of pear, a bit of apple, hibiscus, and citra hops, and this Brettanomyces blend. Along with actually, I threw in a bit of my Sauvignon Blanc X5 as well into that blend. So it was a
Yeah, I had at Shelton Brothers Beer Festival, I helped work that, and I'm a big fan of Argus Cidery in Austin, Texas. I don't know if y'all ever heard of it.
I haven't known.
It's fantastic cidery, and they do get a lot of heirloom apples down there. That they did a Perry that I had. I called it my best show. I mean, we're sitting there with John. I'm sitting there serving beer, Jean Van Roy and
Yeah.
Kenny on it, and I got this
Name
cider.
drop.
Yeah, name drop. And
Nerdy
they
as
had a
name drop.
Perry, and it was a lager Perry. They used lager yeast and lager
Wow.
Perry.
Oh, weird.
And it is absolutely one of the favorite things I've ever had to drink. And I love Perry to start with. A friend of mine is a home brewer. I'll throw his name out here, Jason Farley, name dropper. It was part of our home brew.
Jason
Part of our
Farley.
home brew club. And in about a 2-year period in the Tennessee and the Mid-South region, I think 40 medals that were awarded for Perry and mead. He won like 35 of them.
Wow.
Fantastic. And his Perry was amazing.
Yeah.
And it won a gold medal at the regionals for the National Homebrewers Competition. And so we're getting ready to, I had a beer made at the finals, and we had 200 people in our club, and so we had a little festival, beer festival. He bought his Perry, and everybody's loving his Perry. And so I said, okay, we need your 3 bottles. He starts bottling. He's got a bottle and a half. That's all he's got. So we can even enter it. And this, I guarantee that thing would have medaled at the National Homebrewers Competition. It was amazing.
Oh, I'm a little sad. Actually, we're talking about pears because that's been my secret weapon the last few years. But
Don't tell
pears
anyone.
Can't ferment pears.
They're really, really beautiful fruit. They often start at higher pH, so you're looking at like 3.75 sometimes. I've just used Bartlett blend, so I should say that. But yeah, absolutely beautiful, and I think they would do really well with Lactobacillus as well. The trouble I think I'm having with bacteria is that cider starts at such a low pH, so it's already 3.3, 3.5, so it's hard for Lactobacillus
Yeah,
to
they
do
might not
much
want to
more.
make acid.
Exactly at that point. So I think pear you might have more success with, but I just love it because residual sugar, completely unfermentable, and you don't have to filter or anything. You just do what you do to it and send it out, and don't worry about any world bombs or
What are we
chemicals
drinking?
or anything.
So this is an experiment that never really hit the market. It's a Brett Saison using actually one of.
This is delicious.
I don't know why you're not selling it. 'Cause
Why
it's-
it never hit the market?
Yeah, I mean,
Super tasty
so
beer.
I
Hasn't hit the market yet.
Yeah, I mean, so
Put it
it's
that
okay. It's quietly conditioning for a year now. So it's using Richard's some of his saison strains and one of his more aromatic Brett strains, and then it was actually one of those beers that wasn't meant to be. So originally it was a saison, in quotations, and I threw a whole bunch of I was experimenting with New Zealand hops at the time. So I had some really fresh Southern Cross, Rakow, and Nelson Sauvignon in there. So I kind of threw that into a saison and went, okay, it's good, but it's not excellent. Let's throw some bread at it and make it excellent. And that was about a year ago. So
I feel like that's the thought process behind a lot of sour funk beers. It's just like, well, it's not quite where we want to be it yet, so let's throw something else at it, see what happens.
I think that's the thought process behind a lot of experiments.
Right.
yeah, and this was an experiment, but I decided to bottle it because I wanted to see where it would go. And a few bars, take it, but honestly, I just like having 300 cases of it that I know I can access in one time.
280 cases.
It dwindles slowly. I started with 600.
My birthday's coming up.
Yeah. So
I fit about 40 in my trunk.
it slowly dwindles away. But yeah, honestly, I come back to this beer every couple of weeks, and I like the way it's going.
That's why you're always here.
It's really nice. It's really nice, man.
It is.
Yeah, no,
really
it's
good.
really good. And
Really tasty.
your branding is really on point too. Like, I love the labeling.
That belongs to my marketing dude, Anthony. He's pretty on point with that. So I just make the liquid
important.
inside. But yeah, it is. There's two sides to the business, I think. Or more than that. But the guys who are going to succeed in the future, I think they're going to have the whole kit, right? They're going to have the beer, the marketing, the business savvy, the right culture as well.
Yeah.
They're not going to turn and burn guys like some of the cowboys back in the day did.
Well,
Sweet beards.
Yeah, that's important. I was gonna say that raises sort of an interesting question for people that maybe don't know the Ontario industry. We've grown so
Well,
friggin'
I would say
ridiculously.
it goes with the states as well. Like their market
Yeah.
has grown insane too,
It's
right?
nuts.
So
But like we've got 250 breweries if you include contractors and another 100 coming
more
in
than
next
that.
year. Like,
I actually asked, Mom and Hops or OntarioBev.net or whatever they're called now, is kind of the authority
Chris
on
Burek.
Ontario. Yeah, Chris Burek's the authority on Ontario breweries. And I actually asked him the other week, I was like, man, like here's my start date in the brewing industry 7 years ago. How many breweries did we have? Less than 50.
yeah.
7 years ago. And now there's 210 or something bricks and mortar with probably 100 contract brands and 100 more bricks and mortar in planning for our relatively small population of 13 million.
And funk is becoming a staple. It's going to be
Yep.
either a part of your brewery or
Yeah.
like the focus of your brewery now. I'm seeing it more and more in Ontario, which is really cool to see.
You have
So-
bars and restaurants that are diving in heavily
and
with
funk focused. Yeah.
Yeah, you get guys like Barncat who do
Yeah.
just crazy IPA or just funky beer.
They're great
And that's
brewery.
it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they put out some stouts and stuff, right? But it's like
Totally.
that's their two things, and that's what they love, and that's what they do, and they are crushing. So.
Yeah, and then you
All
get
those people that are lining up for 4 packs of tall cans of hazy IPA in the U.S. should be checking out Barncat right now because they're killing
Yeah,
that game.
that pulp was really good.
It's so good.
That was tasty.
Shout out Rob Hearn because he'll watch this because I'll make him. But
yeah, and then you have bars like Brewery Volo is the first to come to mind, but like people that are focusing on barrel conditioned and funk and sour beers that are putting that out there, and people are becoming aware of it. And it's,
Sure.
Yeah, you've got really really cool bars that have sprung up in the last couple of years, like Birria Volo and Bruck's House, and in Hamilton and Arabella Park and Kitchener that are sort of
okay,
like
Mark's
the next,
already here. You
Try
don't
not to
need
look
to
so
name
excited.
again.
Thanks
That's
for the
the
next
next wave of beer bar that's really pushing some of the more innovative product as well, and that's really cool to see. And yeah, full disclosure, Mark is a part owner of Brook's
Yeah.
House.
but which is kind of the cool thing is when you're a brewer in the industry, you get a little like, hey, give me a pet project you're hiding away in the back, and you get kegs of that. So it's kind of I get a little bit unfair advantage, but no complaints there.
No.
Here's a question. Any use of sherry yeast, lambic equals sherry, cask equals yeast? I don't quite.
What?
Do you ever use sherry yeast, I guess is the question.
Like sherry floor or.
That's what I'm assuming that would mean. I have not.
I haven't either. No. Although wasn't didn't Jester King have like a spawn that was had like a sherry thing happening? I think it's coming out as a little one-off release.
Yeah, I think the point they're making maybe is that I think maybe some of the barrels the lambic breweries buy are from sherry, so maybe there's an influence there, but it's not all from sherry either. You know, there's barrels from all over, from port and wine and everything.
Yeah,
so.
I don't know any beer producers.
We don't really have a sherry
No.
industry up here either.
No.
So,
No.
yeah. No, that's a no here.
Next one.
Straight up. Next one.
I mean, sherry's cool, but yeah, it's not.
Next question.
Not a specialty.
And a comment from Chip Walton. I don't know if any of y'all.
Hey,
cool.
Shop and Brew.
Shop and
He goes-
Brew.
Yeah.
He goes, this interview's badass. That makes me feel good because I think he has some of the best interviews on the market. You know, his blog, Shop and Brew, is just fantastic. So,
Thanks,
yeah,
Chip.
that guy.
Love your
Yeah,
show, buddy.
I watched
Right.
all their stuff when I was like starting homebrewing. So
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's super cool.
Okay, next question. Steam plus fresh cab barrel, 15 minutes once it reaches past 180 degrees to 212 degrees longer. I guess they're asking how you
Steaming barrels?
sterilize your barrels.
We work in metric, so I don't know what that means.
Real hot.
Crazy imperialist.
Yeah.
It depends on what we're doing with our barrels. Like we'll get in fresh wine barrels, and I want the wine character, so I don't touch them. And I trust some of our wine brokers, and I have a good friendship with a winemaker where we get our barrels from, so I know when they've been sulfured, I know how they've been treated. Yeah, that beer right there. If I were to try and like kill what's in a barrel, I would hit it with boiling HLT water because I'm not a steam fitter and I don't have the option to hit it with steam. Some other folks might have ozone systems that they might want to sterilize their barrels. I do the holding solution thing if I'm going to leave them empty for a long time. Potassium metabisulfite and citric acid. Look that up on the Milk the Funk wiki.
There you go. Thank you for that. As an administrator, you gotta do
Yeah.
that and people get mad at us. But,
Oh, I still look it up every time because I forget. So
I like to be really gentle with the wood. I don't like to like hit it with like really high temperature steam because you're pasteurizing over 60 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit. So basically, as long as I have say 20,
it's like a
30
million.
You don't need to.
Yeah, like as long as I'm convinced that I have the minimum amount to kind of knock back the bacteria I don't want, the less heat and chemicals I'm using in a barrel, I think the better the beer. A lot of guys kind of pressurize their barrels like 212 degrees Fahrenheit, or boiling, and I don't know. I kind of think it kind of tears up the wood a bit, and it gives a. Once again, I'm gentle. I try to be really gentle with my oak and my beers. And do the least amount I need to do just not to get an unwanted infection.
Yeah. With my barrels, I don't do anything at all. I mean,
Wow, way to outplay me there.
I'm minimal contact. I'm no
we're just gonna go
contact.
down
Tariq doesn't even
In
have
fact, we do things to our barrels to make them even worse. 'Cause that's how punk we are.
All right, go ahead, Tarek.
No, I get some of my barrels from Casey as well, the
Yeah.
same winemaker that Kevin mentioned.
not
But then I
ruin it
get
for us.
then I get some barrels from Nickel Brook, and I kind of I mean, cider's got such a low pH anyway, so we're not worried about unwanted bacteria in the first place. So if I can get a culture from a brewery or a winery, why not? That's kind of my almost ethos with cider making in general. Why not? As Richard knows. But yeah, I mean, I just don't do much.
Chip Walton just busted in and said, "Can y'all introduce yourselves real quick again? Go around the table." And he said it, and he goes, "Oh snap! Thanks for the shout out."
This is a nice segue to end out the evening, I think.
But we got there's a few
Oh,
more
there's people
questions.
questions. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Graham from Block 3 Brewing.
I'm Kevin. I'm the head brewer of Block 3 Brewing.
And I'm Mark. I'm from Bench Brewing.
I'm Matt from Nickel Brook, where we're at.
I'm Richard. I'm from Escarpment Labs.
And I'm Tarek from Rebel Cider.
To escarpment, okay? Your
Yes.
old world saison just ripped 85% attenuation in less than 48 hours. What is the origin?
That sounds about right. What I can't really reveal the origin. It's a blend of two saison strains. It's essentially our two favorite saison strains, and unfortunately, the origin of those two strains is proprietary because we really like the combination, and we don't necessarily want every single person to know where they're from. And there's this added thing with yeast labs where we can't really outright say where our strains are from, because then you run into trademark infringement. Like, I can't say, hey, this is our Westmalle yeast, because we'll probably get sued by someone. We can't say we're selling Budweiser yeast because they'll probably sue us.
That's what you told us, though.
There's that sort of
You gave us that Budweiser yeast.
So that's old world. It's Westmalle and Budweiser.
Yeah,
Just so you know.
It's a great combination, I wouldn't have thought.
That's a great old world.
Works
saison.
at high and low temperatures.
Yeah.
It's great.
Right in that middle. Get that middle ground. Boom.
Totally.
Old world.
But it's a good combo. of yeast.
Actually, both of these beers here, actually.
The primary with Old World?
Yeah.
The
nice.
Clean Slate and
Both of
the
them were.
Brett Farmhouse, right?
Yeah.
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 Wow.
Another question here. And just jumped in here. Are y'all at CBC report, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no,
No.
someone's got to brew,
Yeah.
But we will be at the Canadian Brewing Awards in Ottawa, May 25th to 28th.
And one of your brewers at
Our,
CBC.
our brewers are both at, so Patrick
Yeah.
and Ryan Morrow, our brewmaster, are both at CBC, as well as our two
The
founders.
Canadian
John
dollar
and
kills us. We can't go down.
Yeah, they're
It's like
joining
$2,000
Trump's
a
America.
person.
Yeah.
No bueno.
I know it's getting late, and you guys drove a long ways. Some of y'all drove a long ways down here. There's one more question. This is actually the first question. It's from Mark, and somebody said, just tell us about your Belgian trip.
Richard had posted that.
Yeah.
That was me, actually.
So that was just one of those those pilgrimages you have to do when you start up a cool ship wild fermentation brewery. You've got to kind of So I went through and saw the guys with cool ships. Actually, when we were joking that you could probably swap my boots right now and get a new wild culture off them. So basically, went
down.
like
Brussels.
Brussels.
Swap me and get some Vermont. So.
Yeah. But honestly, those Belgian brewers, such hospitality. Just big shouts to Jan from De La Seine and Raf from Boca Rita and Danny from Fantoum and
We have like a name drop counter at the bottom.
no.
So it's all the hits. He's
Seven.
playing the hits right
No,
now.
I just want to take all these guys, take the time out, to share a beer and share their knowledge of the Belgian style of brewing, so I can basically bring all that back to Canada. It was just very cool of them, and I was really blown away by how willing they are to share what they know and talk about it, and just down to earth people that I have lauded and idolized for as long as I've been brewing, really. So Belgium's a cool place.
Good fries.
Got a quick question. Any sort of FAN, I don't know what that stands for now, addition for the ciders?
Yeah.
Okay, and if not, any difference in how lab and yeast grow, behave with what? Right, somebody just jumped in here.
Say FAN, like free amino nitrogen.
nitrogen, yeah. So yes, that's.
Is that like you mentioned that was
With assuming to be less buffered natural wort.
like low
Sorry.
nutrients in the
Must work.
cider?
Let's.
Let's read this question again. So I got any
Okay.
sort of fan addition for the ciders?
Yeah.
If not, any difference in how lab and yeast grow, behave with what I'm assuming to be less buffered must or wort?
Less buffered. Okay, so I mean, I don't buffer my must at all.
Okay.
That's a funny.
Not even when you're
sentence.
not even when you're alone. Like
I'm just.
Well, that just shot
That is
Like
only,
Friday night, girlfriend's out.
no R-rated.
that is
beers.
only funny to whoever is
the sentence
watching.
came out.
Sometimes you want to buffer your butts a little bit.
It's a good thing it's on 21 plus Facebook.
Don't worry
page.
about it.
19 plus in America. Right?
Okay.
But yes, yes.
What's that stand for? What's
free,
so-
a free available nitrogen.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just a nitrogen addition to cider. So cider, like I was saying, very nutrient efficient. It's grains have. I don't know if you guys worry about nutrition at all. Do you?
Not as much.
Basically, if
Clearly, we
if wort if wort doesn't have the nitrogen, yeast isn't going to ferment it.
Right.
That's just what
Fair
happens.
enough. Yeah, yeah.
Unless you're doing wild ferments, when you want a really nutrient deficient
Right,
So
the
it
bacteria
it
will
does
do
the
its thing.
long-term work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
But-
right. So
but
I've actually got
Saccharomyces
something like
like-
that going on right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, wild fermentation. I've got a wild one going, which I haven't added any nitrogen at all to, which just kind of seemed to be stalling out a little bit. But anyways,
Maybe because of the lack of nitrogen.
exactly. Yeah. So you always add nitrogen to cider. On a homebrew scale, interestingly enough, I never had an issue with this. I never added nutrient, and everything fermented to dryness. But
Do you ever get a lot of sulfur? I've had sulfur.
yes, yeah. So sulfides, for sure. That's a big thing. And nutrient addition, nitrogen specifically, will reduce that. You also get it more often, I find, with Sauvignon Blanc strains, which Richard has put me onto.
Thiols.
Yeah.
Thiol release rather. So
Exactly, yeah. So even when you're doing like an oxidative fermentation like I am, I'm still getting a lot of those reductive notes. But yeah, nitrogen will reduce that. So I mean, realistically, if you're gonna buy a nutrient, just look at the package. What does it say? How much to add? Do that. That's what I do.
Typical Milk of Funk Live, right when we're getting ready to sign off, the questions start flying in because everybody's.
That's all right.
That's all right.
We do a lightning round.
Any
Here's
tips
lightning.
for reducing cross-contamination in a brewery?
Have two.
Pressure cooking valves, fittings, etc. Anybody?
Yeah, so we've got our breweries are going to be split between a clean side and a funk side, and then just color coding it red on the funk side, black on the clean side. So red gaskets, red T-shirts, red everything on the funk side, with a sanitary airlock in between that blows air from the clean side into the funk side.
That's like some Star Trek
That
shit.
is
Well,
really
yeah,
intense.
that's awesome.
We just
The red
built
shirts-
another brewery 20 minutes away. That's what we
shirts,
we dealt with
they
it.
die.
We deal with
No,
both.
just to make it so you have that response. If you see something red, then you kill it with fire. If
We
you're
used to be mentioning red shirts in Star Trek, red shirts for the guys who died in the
Yeah, exactly.
So we run both in the same facility, but as Mark said, we do have separate hoses. In our case, the white hoses are the bacteria hoses, and then we'll run Brett and Saccharomyces through the same bottling line, the same packaging, the same tanks, whatever. But when we switch to a beer that might have lacto or PDO, then that's a different set of hoses, that's a different bottling line, that's a different set of gaskets, like anything soft. We switch that. We don't go so far as to positively pressurize our brewery and wear different shirts, because I mean, these cost money. I mean, yeah, we just try to do one thing on one day and one thing on another and be as clean as possible. And thus far, we haven't really had that many issues.
I don't think we've
Heat,
had any issues.
yeah, heat will do a lot.
Mhm.
Heat will do a lot. If you're causticing something at 80 degrees Celsius,
yeah.
you're pretty much pasteurizing
Yeah,
it.
I mean, at the end of the day, when we started using Brett in our process, I think we like to treat it like a regular yeast. If you're going to kill a regular yeast with or a Saccharomyces with, hot caustic, and
Yeah.
you should be able to kill.
Yeah, I mean,
A Brett, yeah.
people definitely unfairly scared of Brettanomyces.
Yeah.
It's not the devil on stilts. It's it can be killed, but I like to just put more barriers in between.
Absolutely.
Like, something happening, because it's really one wrong move from an intern, and you can there was breweries in, I won't mention which ones, and they had to build a second brewery just because they're having so many infection problems.
Yeah. And there's a difference between the scale of bench versus the scale of us.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, you guys are going big in distribution game, and we're keeping it small and tight, right? So there's different concerns there. Absolutely.
Yeah. If you had like 2 or 3 guys who you trained up and you knew exactly how they work,
Yeah.
Right.
you'd have a lot more confidence about
Yeah,
doing
I
something
see
like that,
everything
yeah.
my guys do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, even if I were a brewmaster or a QC manager at a brewery, I would be way more terrified of French Saison than I would be of any Brett strain.
3711
Because
especially.
if any of those strains, any of those diastatic sac yeast strains get into your IPA or your Imperial Stout, you're dealing with bottle bombs or can bombs, and that becomes an actual physical liability.
Yeah.
That's way scary. Getting sued because someone got cut by a can rupturing is way scarier than a Brett off flavor in a clean beer. So
Now for-
that's sort of my perspective. Is like Brett and bacteria are maybe even less of a problem. It's still a problem, and these guys have talked about a lot about proactive QC, doing implementing measures to prevent cross contamination from happening. it still happens. So it's really important to also do retroactive QC to monitor your product. You know, pay a microbiologist. There's lots of microbiologists that want to get into craft beer. Pay a microbiologist
There's a local
to check your
laboratory in
stuff.
Ontario that might do this for you.
And we do
Do you
some,
guys,
we do
Discovery offer
QC
these
consulting
services?
as well.
Do you guys
So,
offer these services?
absolutely, we do
Because
QC
I
consulting.
think a lot of breweries don't know that you do though.
Absolutely. We do QC consulting for breweries to, especially those that are managing a lot of yeast strains, because that can become a huge problem area if you have, again, a more attenuated yeast, for example, that's gotten into your clean ale stream.
And,
Or,
especially with the rise of cans,
Yeah.
not nearly as pressure resistant as bottles are. You get a a saison type yeast into a 2.5 Plato IPA. Yeah, you're gonna have some super carbonation.
I mean, we even just did this today. We had bottles. We kept them in our boiler room for what 3-4 months now.
Yeah, almost
Some of them, and it was packaged
Just
as
as an experiment?
yeah, packaged as 3 Plato, bottle
trying to blow
conditioned
them
with
up.
Brett. We were
Yeah.
trying to blow them up,
Yeah,
that's a good experiment.
and they did not blow up.
yeah.
And it didn't taste great, but
Yeah.
it tasted okay.
Our,
you know?
our brewmaster
3 months at
refuses-
40 Celsius is not
yeah,
great.
Our brewmaster refuses to let us can anything sour or anything lacto or anything with Brett just for that reason, and he won't even do pins or cask or any of that kind of stuff. And I was just at a
We won't for another reason.
LCBO. I was just at an LCBO
Cask. We don't like cask.
meeting, and they were talking about they were showing us some of the complaints they got from people, and like cans exploding and like sending stuff across the kitchen like 20
Woo!
feet, like
Jesus.
it's
Ivy.
like they had
Which is a huge
an
issue.
LCBO employee whose T-shirt got cut open by the top of a can exploding on the shelf.
Yeah.
And these are non-sour beers that have gotten infected with other stuff.
Yeah.
We all know whose beer that was, but there were a
I
few.
don't, let's say.
I think that the big point
We're
is
off
that
camera, we're off
Brett
camera.
isn't the bogeyman here. There's
No.
so many
No.
other potential quality
These-
issues is that you need to have a really rigorous quality
Yeah, and
control
I-
program to prevent these things
A
from
lot of these
happening.
were just secondary fermentation with residual sugars from.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
additives.
observe a stable gravity for a
Well,
while before you bottle it.
I mean, I think
Like,
we listened in on that tech talk there, and like you, I'm also not a brewer, but but some of the questions that were coming in, as a non-brewer, I could answer those questions.
Right.
It was scary.
Yeah, and that's part of the issue when you have 250 breweries with another 100 opening is not everyone's going to have the same QC standards as they should.
which is why they should email Rich.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
Bam!
Give me more work.
Yeah.
No, but
Give me more money.
they do provide lab services, so why wouldn't you? Like, if they're available, if there's something you're not sure about,
If you
use
want to
them.
add Demerara right before you can, maybe don't do that because.
Or add the right amount.
Yeah.
I got a sweet spreadsheet. Email me.
We give a lot of free advice too. Like I get emails from Kevin every couple weeks about random stuff, and I'm like, okay, I can spend 20 minutes answering.
Yeah, I'm like
Kevin's
Packers at
question.
Cubs. Who's up? Who's up? Who's gonna win?
We got another quick question from Richard. It said he's got a scarf at Richard. He says, having a New World Saison in a keg secondary going on for a month or two at 20 degrees centigrade. Any tips on Brett development with this blend?
It'll keep doing its thing. My optimal level with New World, which is a saison blend that does include 2 Brett strains. Actually, the same 2 Brett strains that were in that collab with Four Winds over there. Is my recommendation is to age it warm. Even if you're making the beer fairly fresh and bottling it,
I'll finish
age it
up.
warm for a couple months after that point.
I'm not driving anymore.
There's a beer that's made by a brewery in Toronto called Folly Brewing, Flemish Cap. That's made with the New World. It is bottled fairly young, 3 or 4 weeks. But if you hold that warm, this is what I've been telling them. Is like hold it warm for like a month or two because it gets so much better. And that's definitely a thing with New World is it's a Brett Saison blend in general with those. I mean that can include like the White Labs, American Farmhouse, and all of those things. It's like, yeah, you can probably package it pretty soon because you've got a Saison strain in there, so that's taking care of most of the sugar. But then you can age those bottles, for a couple months or even a couple years, and they'll develop. They'll change over time. It's like Mark talked about with Orval. It's like with Brett in a bottle or in a package or even a keg, probably keg conditioning or something like that, you'll see development over time. So you sort of you have one beer that becomes like 4 different beers because it changes over time.
And I think as well, if you push all those, Belgian-y type esters, phenolics, and then you Brett, you can get a very quick transformation into like bread aromas. I've seen as quick as 3 days.
It can be
going.
pretty quick.
Yeah,
You know, if
Brett
you-
likes
if
to
you-
make things taste like bread.
If you, yeah, I mean, if you strategize
Yeah.
correctly with your Brett, and we've seen some research. We did a little project with Omega Labs, so I mean, the yeast labs work together too. You can see the flavor development, and in our case, as little as 3 weeks, but that isn't to say that it happened faster. So it didn't happen faster. So
Yeah, and it's weird. Like sometimes I've had Brett in a tank, like us nice and bready, transferred to the bright tank. Where did my Brett go? Bottle it an hour later and pour a glass. Like there it is again. And it's a finicky thing, and then it'll miss for a day or two again. It'll come back. So it is kind of a finicky little thing. But if you give it the right food, it'll make what you want.
Quick question for Richard. If you're launching a brewery,
come on, there's other guys here.
No.
Whenever I've done these before, I'm always trying to get the yeast guys, and they seem to get a lot of questions.
Yeah,
It is milk and fun, right?
milk and fun.
You guys are all nerds.
But if you're launching, but this actually will go for everybody, because if you're launching a brewery, what would be your minimum QC standards for clean mixed breweries, specifically for in-house lab tests? And we've answered some of these questions.
I wouldn't launch a brewery because there's other people that are way smarter with that side of things than me.
Okay,
Richard,
okay, minimum-
promote the $500 lab.
$500 lab. I mean, minimum lab tests. I mean, it really depends on what you're doing. Whether you're doing like the full like sour funky thing, or whether you're doing just clean beers. Either way, there's certain control points you want to monitor for. So like something like a forced ferment test. All you need is a stir plate and a flask. You can do the forced ferment test. That's going to tell you the maximum fermentability of your work by your yeast. So at a certain point, well in advance of your actual fermentation being done, when your fermentation is finished. Your forced ferment ends at 2 Plato. Your yeast in the tank is going to finish at 2 Plato. That tells you that, okay, we're at 2 Plato. That means we're actually ready to crash this thing and package it. We're not going to have to deal with re-fermentation later in the package. That's a good thing. Forced diacetyl is another key one. We still see a lot of issues with diacetyl.
Please do that.
In beer across the board, and not just here, also in the U.S. Lots of diacetyl in craft beer in the U.S. And this is a really easy thing to control for as well. You can do the forced diacetyl test, which basically just means taking that beer, before it's been crashed, usually after it's finished fermentation, you warm it up. You warm it up to 60 C. You smell it. You can smell it at that point. If you're really sensitive to fusels like I am, you can cool it back down. Smell it again. What that does is it converts some of the other VDKs into diacetyl, allows you to smell it at a higher sensitivity, and then you'll be able to sort of treat that as a pass-fail test. Okay, I smelled some diacetyl. We're going to hold this warmer, rise the temp a bit, get that taken up by the yeast. Or I don't smell it. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's crash that beer. Let's package it. And then the third thing would be checking for yeast cross-contamination, because brewers are starting to use way more yeast. They're starting to use Saison yeast, things that are a little bit more dangerous in my mind in terms of attenuation. So doing a little basic plating, WLN plates, for example, to check and make sure that the yeast you've used in beer A is the yeast that's meant for beer A, not the yeast from beer B. That's really, really helpful, and that'll help ensure you have stability. Because at the end of the day, you need to know that you're not going to have, the biggest risk is hurting people, or having a beer that can't sit on shelves, because you're going to have to dump it. You're going to have to lose all of that money. So that's the big thing. And then after that point, you sort of have to worry about the other aspects of QC and QA, like sensory and flavor stability and stuff like that.
If I may touch on that, a traceable line of who did what, saying somebody sanitized this tank and somebody pulled this yeast and somebody did this cell count.
Thank you, Kevin. Yes.
That costs nothing, first off. That's just literally someone initialing a checklist. Also, you can buy a pretty tight microscope and hemocytometer for $500.
Yeah. Amscope,
And
Omex, they're both.
I like my Amscope that I got, but we talked about this on the way driving down here. I have half a music degree, and I do cell counts. Like this, it is unacceptable that people don't do cell counts. I learned how to do it. You guys can figure it out. Granted, I did email Rich like every day, but it's totally fine. I figured it out.
It's cool. You
So-
stop getting blue stuff all over your hands.
I did get a lot of blue stuff on my hands.
Another question? I hate to,
That's all right.
Let's go.
While
Let's
we're
go.
here, man, I don't
Sure,
go to
yeah.
Canada once a year, maybe.
got a
Richard,
cat to pick up.
utterly obvious, this is
Richard.
this has been a big
Anna.
topic. The big topic is,
You get it under.
what differences have you noticed in your now some Kvik strains? Is that how it's pronounced? Kvik?
Kvik.
Right.
It's hard. It's hard. It's like a
Grains
soft
compared to
bean.
Saccharomyces, yeah.
So they are Saccharomyces. They are by and large they're Saccharomyces cerevisiae. They are ale yeasts,
Yeah.
but they're like a separate family of ale yeasts. And in terms of properties, they are in comparison to the other ones we work with, like English, American, British. Sorry, English and British, really the same thing. English American. I meant to say German. They have their own characteristics. They're by and large temperature tolerant. You can grow these guys. Let's go grow at 40 Celsius, 110-ish Fahrenheit. I don't know, 110-ish Fahrenheit. Really hot.
I've had one at 95. It was absolutely delicious.
Yeah, they can grow very, very warm.
Oh, look at that.
That's pretty rare.
The
for,
Uber. The
Add
Uber.
some color to the
Yeah,
conversation.
look at this beer.
Yeah,
here.
don't you
This
mean
is
pretty
awesome.
beer,
This
eh?
one.
Raspberry Uber.
That's pretty rare for Saccharomyces. They're super alcohol tolerant.
Oh, you got a couple of them. Okay.
And they ferment quickly, and they sort of have their own unique flavor profile. That we're still sort of trying to like tease out what those actual flavor compounds are. So they're pretty cool. We're still working out how to ferment with them the best, but it's like this own separate branch on the yeast family tree. Like you have English strains, you have American strains, you have Belgian strains, you have German strains, you have Kvike. It's its own thing, and it sort of stands on its own in terms of uniqueness and utility. So I think we're going to see a lot more of these things come into the market and get used. I just made an IPA with Kvike, and I'm like, this is the best version of this. This is an IPA I make a lot. It's the best version of this IPA I've made, and I used this weird Norwegian yeast to make it instead of like Vermont ale. So
Sweet.
Tell us about this beer.
I figure if we're gonna keep going, I gotta bring out the red beer. This is our raspberry Uber. So this sort of evolved from, we had our Berliner Weiss, and then I think we had like a marketing intern who was like, let's try some weird fruits. We did a mango version, which was terrible. We've done a peach version, which was incredible. And I was telling these guys earlier, we brought in like whole peaches, and they had to pick them themselves, and it was a mess, but it smelled
Were you gone by
amazing in
that time,
here
right?
for about 3 days. Yeah, were you still here?
No,
that time?
I was here. I worked on the first raspberry, and
There you go.
I won't tell you how the mango went wrong, but it was not. I was out of the country at the time.
I just heard it wasn't great.
Let me just leave it there.
But this one, so we use real raspberries. We get them frozen, so they break down really nicely. But they're not a puree. They're a whole fruit raspberry. Last year we used Ontario and then BC. This year I think we're using Chile and then Ontario and then BC because of the seasonality. But yeah, it's 3.9%. Pretty tart, pretty refreshing. Tons and tons of raspberry. No artificial flavors, no artificial colors. We get a lot of, again, when we were speaking about opening the beer world up to more consumers. We get a lot of people drinking this that don't drink beer. We get a lot of bros that are like, "This is beer," and I fight them because they don't understand the definition of beer. But anyway, it's cool.
And a fun bit of Milk the Funk trivia. If you look up the Milk the Funk wiki page for kettle souring, still is a picture that Mark posted comparing pre-acidifying versus not pre-acidifying
So, yeah, that was kind of
head
fun.
retention. And it
So,
was this beer,
yeah,
wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So it was this beer, and at the time we were experimenting how to get a nice settling head. So I was talking to Richard, and he said, "Oh yeah, just take it down to 4.5, 4.6 pH."
And that wasn't my idea. That's something I learned from Milk the Funk.
And this is really interesting because it goes back and forth between people saying, I'm getting good, again, this is 21 plus, I'm getting really good head, not doing that. Right? And getting good head,
So-
what's a 4.5?
so
So,
the-
if you've got some thoughts on this, go ahead, yeah.
The basic science of it is that you take it down to a pH where the lactobacillus is no longer in a proteolytic or proteinase phase. It's not breaking down proteins in your beer, and that works for all. Like I pre-acidify a lot of my beers that have lactobacillus in them, just because it increases head retention as well. You're always going to fight that fight with a sour beer that keeps a nice billowy head on it.
Like I think that at least the people who are into these kind of beers understand that maybe head retention is not something that to expect in a sour beer, but damn, it sure is pretty, right?
Yeah. And it's one of those beers that when you pour it at a festival, people come up to you and go, "What's that red beer you guys have?"
Yeah,
So
Yeah, but the head is so nice in this one because it's just kind of nice, kind of like what
like pillowy pink.
pillowy kind of pink.
If you
pink.
pour a full glass, it's
really,
it's
fucking
fine
nice.
and it
Yeah.
sticks around.
But yeah, but just I think I was talking to Richard between 2 brew days, and I did one without, and then I think the following day I did one acidified. So it was nice to have that that control sample.
I think it's funny how quickly that information goes out into the world. It's like I don't know anyone who does kettle sour that doesn't pre-acidify anymore.
No, it's
Right?
happened super quickly. People have adopted these, these, I don't want to say rules, but these guidelines.
Yeah.
And how are you pre-acidified? Just using,
Yeah, I've
There's been debates.
there's the question, yeah.
Phos or lacto for us?
So,
Yeah,
lactic,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, I've experimented
But
with
which is better?
I've experimented with citric, phosphoric, and lactic, and different beers require different things. But generally speaking, lactic is your safest bet.
Yep.
Unless you really have good reason to push a citric aspect on it. I'm not a big fan of phosphoric. There's that kind of Pepsi-ish kind of flavor to it. Like the same way, if you look at the old soda jerks, when they used to make sodas back in the day, it was all like which acid was with which syrups to give you a profile. And if you want to go read those old books, that's a good idea of how to learn about like the different tastes of acids. Or else just blend up a 4 pH water with different acids and taste those, and they'll give you an idea of what you're looking for.
That's interesting with the whole soda thing. I didn't really think about that. That like that's basically what colas are. Is
Yeah, they're basically-
sugar and
phosphorus.
acid.
They're basically
Acid,
bartenders mixing with acids and sugars
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
syrups and stuff like that. That's kind of where that came from.
Phosphates. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't think of any other acids that you use to pre-acidify.
Lactic and phos are by far the most common. I mean,
Yeah.
I prefer lactic because, like you said, like phosphoric acid, if you take a beer pre-acidified at 4.5 with phos and take it down to like 3.5, it's still a little too soft for a lot of consumers, and it depends where the consumers are too. But
Yeah,
I kind of like the pre-acidified with lactic and then bring it down to 3.5. That's kind of like the sweet spot for me, but
So
other
ignorant-
people might think otherwise.
Ignorant question: would acidulated malt do a similar?
you can't
purpose,
hit
or
hit
you
full
can't?
point. You can't. You I think you can
You
hit
would have-
4.5 and still get conversion on your.
You would have match problems.
Yeah.
You'd have to add it right at the end.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Which would be no just I mean
You're,
just-
you're basically doing the same thing.
Right.
yeah just acidify end of your boil is what I do, or in my whirlpool, and that seems to work pretty well.
We go home now.
Hey, I think that's it. Hey, I want to thank everybody.
Hey, thank
It was
you,
one of the
guys.
best
Cheers.
ones ever. We had a tremendous amount of people watching live,
Excellent.
a lot of questions. Hey, I want to ask you, of course, a lot of people are just getting home on the west coast of the continent, and across the world, they'll wake up and see this in the morning. So if you could just monitor this page, it'll be on here. I'm sure Dan Pixley will post it on Milk the Funk Live. We have on the wiki, there's a spot for all the videos that I've done. Just monitor it over the next couple of days. I'm also going to make it available so y'all can take it outside Milk the Funk if you want to post it on your pages.
Yeah, for sure.
Because and also I'll just save it and I'll put it on a page because right now it's under private on the Milk the Funk page. But I can save it to my iPhone and then post it, and then you can put it on YouTube or wherever you want to do it for your pages. Twitter, I heard you
Yeah.
mentioned Twitter, so you can share it on your pages. Again, thank you. It was awesome, and thanks for driving. I know some of y'all drove from north of Toronto to get down here to meet me here. And like I said, I was struggling. They were all here about 30 minutes before I got here. I had a company dinner that they sprung on me at the last minute. My boss told me I had to be at that thing, and I'm thinking, where's my food? I gotta go. So again, thanks y'all. Again,
sure, no worries.
Milk the Funk Live, north of the border.
Yeah, man.
Maybe about the same time again next year. We'll get everybody together again and see what's new, and maybe
bring some cider this
maybe
time.
I'll bring some cider. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Woo!